part 3 of History of Jerusalem in Art, Realities and Fantasies, How Art Reveals the Historic Multiculturalism of Jerusalem, from the Ottomans to the present day. Jerusalem, the city of peace, has not often been peaceful. Sunni Salim defeated his Shia Safavid rival Shah Ismail at the bloody Battle of Chaldiran, using modern firearms and armaments, thus establishing the long-lived Ottoman Empire that he expanded to 576,900 square miles, or 1,494 kilometers, increasing it by 70%. Here's a map of the Ottoman Empire 1300 to 1520, and then until 1914, when it ended. Jerusalem is in an area at high risk for earthquakes. In 1528, an earthquake occurred, severely damaging Palestine and Jerusalem. Replacing his father Salim I, Suleiman the Magnificent was young, tall, and learned, a reformer, poet, and patron of the arts and architecture. He captures Jerusalem in 1517. He rebuilds Jerusalem's walls that exist today and helped repair the tomb of Christ from 1535 to 44. French missionaries were now free to travel to Jerusalem. He made an alliance with Francis I against their common enemy, the Habsburg Charles V. As Sultan of the Ottoman Empire from 1520 to 1566, he both enlarged his realm and developed the arts, architecture, literature, and law. The next 2 centuries, there were many interesting developments in Jerusalem. In the mid-17th century, in 1663, Sabbatai Zevi proclaimed himself to be the Messiah in Jerusalem and attracted thousands of followers called Sabbateans, even though he later became a Muslim under Sufi influence. There was much virulent anti-Islamic polemics and divisions that emerged in the Jewish community as a result. In 1672, the First Synod of Jerusalem was held and consecrated the new Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem that was later restored in the 20th century by the Palestinians. Judas the Pious led about 1,000 Jews from Poland, Germany, and Moravia to Jerusalem at the beginning of the 18th century. That produced a crisis in the Jewish community, which was unable to help support such a large group, since only about 200 Ashkenazi and 1,000 Sephardi Jews lived there. There were also suspicions that some of them were Sabbateans. And then Judah died a few days after arrival and is buried on the Mount of Olives. That made things worse. The newcomers went deeper in debt to build a small synagogue that in 1720 the Arab creditors set on fire and took over the area. The Turks blamed all the Jews and banned the Ashkenazim from the area. It was rebuilt in 1864, called Hurvat Yehuda HaHasid, destroyed place of Judah HaHasid, becoming the main Ashkenazi synagogue in Jerusalem. Destroyed again in the 1948 war, then rebuilt in 2010. In 1703, there was a revolt against the Egyptians and their excessive taxes, and in 1705 there were restrictions against the Jews blamed for the revolt. This map of 18th century Jerusalem by Dupere was designed for pilgrims and dedicated to the Empress Elizabeth Christine, the wife of Charles VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, and is considered to be an accurate description. Jerusalem was called the capital of Palestine in 18th century maps and books. A Christian Mamluk ruler in 1771 temporarily took control of Jerusalem from the Ottomans with the help of the Arabs and Russians. But Catherine the Great of Russia got the right to protect the Christians in Jerusalem and the entire Ottoman Empire after Russia's decisive victory over the Ottoman in the Russian-Turkish War of 1768 to 74. This right had previously been given to France and England. In 1798, Gregory V of Constantinople, the Orthodox Patriarch, declared the Ottoman Empire to be part of God's plan to protect the Orthodox Church from Roman Catholicism and Western secularism. However, he gets blamed for the Greek uprising against the Ottomans and is hanged in his vestments after Mass on Easter Sunday in 1821. His body left for 2 days on the main gate and then given over to the Jews, who dragged it through the streets and threw it into the sea. The Turks then killed the Christians in Constantinople. Then the Greeks killed the Jews in southern Greece as collaborators with the Turks. Meanwhile, Napoleon in 1799 tried unsuccessfully to capture Jerusalem after enacting laws to emancipate Jews in France. He invited all Jews of Asia and Africa to join him in re-establishing ancient Jerusalem. Some saw it as an attempt to establish a Jewish state. Others saw it as propaganda designed to enlist local Jews in his wars against the British. Documents said to prove a Zionist agenda are said to be forgeries. And the Greek War of Independence and Rebellion in Jerusalem is stopped by the Ottomans, but its success was an inspiration for Zionists. In 1826, another rebellion, an anti-tax rebellion, was put down by Ottomans, and shortly thereafter Sir Moses Montefiore, a British-Italian financier, a relative and associate of the Rothschilds, visits Jerusalem to promote Jewish development. He was an early proto-Zionist philanthropist. By mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire began to decline, and in 1831, Ibrahim Pasha of Egypt conquers Jerusalem. In 1834, Jerusalem joins the Arab peasant revolt against Egyptian conscription and taxation. Historians see this event as formative for the Palestinian sense of nationhood. The first European Council is opened in 1838. Here is James Finn, the British consul, who arrived in 1845, a devout Christian involved in promoting Christianity among Jews. He purchased a barren piece of land outside the walls, known as Karim Avraham, to train Jews in agriculture so they could become productive citizens. In 1839, Rabbi Judah Al-Khali writes, urging Jews to emigrate. But Jews are warned to lay low by Pasha, who forbids them from being in the paved area in front of the Western Wall. In 1840, the Ottomans retake Jerusalem with the help of the English, and in 1852, the Sultan establishes the rights and responsibilities of Christian churches at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the so-called status quo that still exists today. In 1853, Jerusalem is given back to Catholics in the French treaty that led to the Crimean War with Russia. The Jewish population grew, and in 1860 the first Jewish neighborhoods were built outside the walls. In 1862, there was the first official Aliyah, when 35,000 Jews migrate to Palestine. The first Zionist Congress, organized by Theodor Herzl, was held in 1897. But most Jews, Reform and Orthodox, opposed Zionism because they feared it would harm the status of Jews. But the Congress adapted the Basel program, and Herzl wrote that he had founded the Jewish state. There was a debate over whether Jerusalem should be the capital of the Jewish state. The issue was controversial due to fear that religious Orthodox Jews would gain too much power if it were based in Jerusalem. Herzl was a complex man who believed there was no escape from anti-Semitism in Europe, and that assimilation would never succeed. But he was basically secular and resisted religion's influence over politics and public affairs, and believed that religion should just be one's own private affair. He refused to permit his son to be circumcised. He was against the Nationalist Party that wanted to make Jews a privileged class in Israel, and felt this was a betrayal of Zionism that he equated with humanitarianism and tolerance. He insisted that Jews and Arabs, Muslim and Christian, should live together in harmony. He believed all non-Jews should have equal rights. He wrote, "It goes without saying that we shall respectfully tolerate persons of other faiths and protect their property, their honor, and their freedom, to set the entire world a wonderful example." He believed that when the Zionists obtain land in Palestine, we shall bring immediate benefits to the state that receives us. Yet, in the 20th century begins with restrictions on Jewish immigration and land purchase in 1901. Despite this, Jewish refugees continued to come to Palestine due to persecutions in Europe. The first Aliyah in the late 1800s, people came mostly from Russia and Yemen. The second Aliyah prior to World War I was mostly Jews from Russia escaping pogroms, and these refugees brought ideas of socialism and started the first kibbutzes and revived the Hebrew language. In World War I, during the siege of Jerusalem, the British began to airdrop cigarettes filled with large doses of opium in hopes the Ottoman soldiers would smoke them and become too stoned to fight, and their plan worked. During the Battle of Jerusalem, the Ottomans were defeated, and the mayor of Jerusalem surrendered the city to the British. General Allenby entered Jerusalem on foot, imitating the respectful victory of Caliph Omar over Jerusalem. This dramatic event inspired many. His entrance was well planned, but was an alternative to the original idea to fulfill an ancient Muslim prophecy. The prophet from the west would enter Jerusalem by the Golden Gate and bring an end to Turkish rule when Nile water was brought into Palestine. Well, Nile water was brought by the British Army's Trans-Sinai pipeline, and Allenby's name written in Arabic was Al-Nebi, meaning the prophet. But the Golden Gate was walled up, and he would have had to walk through a Muslim graveyard in the Mosque of Omar, so this plan was dropped. The British mandate was established over Palestine, and Sir Ronald Storrs was, as he described, the first military governor of Jerusalem after Pontius Pilate. Lawrence of Arabia said of Storrs that he was the most brilliant Englishman in the Near East, with a great love of music, letters, sculpture, painting, and anything beautiful in the world. Storrs tried to reconcile the Arabs and the Jews, and even established an international chess club to help foster mutual understanding. The Balfour Agreement of 1917 between Britain and Lord Rothschild had declared British support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Storrs had hoped to unite the different sides, but instead he gained the hostility of all while trying to be fair in his administration. Jewish immigration continued pre-1948 despite the efforts of the British to set limits. The situation in Europe grew worse for Jews. After World War I, the Third Aliyah brought more Russians, and they developed agriculture and kibbutzes. The Fourth Aliyah, from 1924 to 29, was of Jews escaping anti-Semitism in Poland and Hungary. They were middle-class families who set up businesses. This is a shot of the ship the Exodus. The Fifth Aliyah was driven by the rise of Nazism and extreme nationalism across Eastern Europe, bringing the largest number of immigrants ever. The story of the ship the Exodus was the subject of a Hollywood movie. Nearly 250,000 Jews entered Palestine between 1919 and the beginning of World War II. They included many professionals, doctors, lawyers, artists, and architects. However, after 1936, the British imposed harsher restrictions due to Arab anger and violence in the community. In 1920, there were the Nabi Musa riots in the Old City. It was not clear who began them. Some evidence suggests Jewish provocation. 5 Jews and 4 Arabs were killed. The British withdrew their troops. The Jews became more autonomous, although 70% of the Arabs signed a document protesting against anti-Jewish demonstrations in Jerusalem. In 1924, the Dutch Jew, Jacob Israel de Haan, was assassinated by Haganah, the Jewish terrorist organization, because of his anti-Zionist activities and contact with Arab leaders. Here he is, dressed as an Arab. He was a precursor of Amnesty International due to his concern for the welfare of all prisoners, both Arabs and Jews. In 1929, Palestinian riots were organized by the Zionist Committee for the Western Wall. These resulted from a long dispute between Muslims and Jews and Christians over access to the Western Wall, with much destruction and death that the British were unable to contain. The British have been issuing what's called the White Papers since 1922, giving Jews the right to immigrate, but not to, quote, exceed the economic capacity of the country at the time to absorb new arrivals, unquote. In 1928, it declared that no screens or benches could be brought to the Western Wall since they had not been permitted by the Ottomans. In 1930, the government issued statements to protect Arab rights and regulate Jewish immigration and land purchase. By 1939, the British restricted Jewish immigration to 75,000 and limited land purchase. However, this left many European Jews with no place to escape, since America and free Europe was often closed to them. Here's Jews demonstrating against the White Paper in Jerusalem. Ships as the Exodus carried illegal immigrants during the Holocaust. That was dangerous, but a necessity for many during World War II. After World War II, the situation worsened in Jerusalem, and the King David Hotel was blown up by the Jewish terrorist organization Irgun. 91 were killed. 28 were British officials. This painting celebrates Muslims, Christians, and Jewish historic claims to Jerusalem in peace. In 1947, the UN Partition Plan internationalized Jerusalem as a, quote, corpus separatum. This is Latin for separated body, which placed the city under an international regime, giving it special status due to its shared religious importance. This was approved by the Lausanne Conference of 1949, along with the right of return of Palestinian refugees. The UN adopted the plan with a 2/3 majority. However, its implementation failed. Israel has insisted that Jerusalem belongs to them and ignores international treaties and law. Many Jews fantasize about the rebuilding of the temple and the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. From 1947 to 48, there was civil war in Mandatory Palestine. A Christian hotel, the Semiramis, was bombed by a Jewish paramilitary terrorist group, the Haganah. 26 were killed, including one child and the Spanish vice consul. On April 9th, in 1948, around 120 paramilitary terrorists from Irgun and the Stern Gang, led by Menachem Begin, killed 177 Palestinian men, women, and children in their village of Deir Yassin, in deliberate assassinations, rapes, mutilations, with corpses decapitated or disemboweled. 25 male villagers were put into trucks, paraded through the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, taken to a stone quarry, and shot. The Jews wanted the village for an airfield outside Jerusalem and invented the story that there were Arab militants there, although the village had been peaceful and had actually expelled militants. Now the records have been locked away by Israel in an effort to cover up the crimes committed to form the Israeli state. A Hadassah medical convoy 5 days later was attacked in revenge for Deir Yassin and other attacks on Palestinians. 78 Jewish doctors, nurses, students, patients, and Haganah fighters and a British soldier were killed in the attack. The mandate ends and the British leave Jerusalem, its last stronghold. Britain had lost all ability to maintain order during the Arab-Jewish War. When Truman heard the British were going to leave, he said, "Unfortunately, it has become clear that the partition plan cannot be carried out at this time by peaceful means." So he supported UN trusteeship rather than partition. But after Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel, the United States recognized the provisional government. Despite this, the American Consul General Wasson was killed by an unknown assassin, probably Jewish. In May 1948, he said he had a narrow escape when the consulate came under gunfire. On May 22nd, he tried to stop the Arab Legion shelling of the Hadassah Hospital and University on Mount Scopus, but the Arab commander told him the buildings were being used by Jewish forces to shell the Arab Sheikh Jarrah quarter, and he gave him surrender terms to deliver to the fighting Jews to evacuate as prisoners of war, and that the medical staff would go to the Red Cross. Later that day, Wasson was shot returning from a meeting with the UN Truce Commission by an unknown assailant. The Arab Legion destroys the Hurva synagogue in the Old City, and the Jewish quarter of the Old City falls to the Arab Legion, with many synagogues destroyed. However, West Jerusalem was given to the State of Israel. And here's a painting celebrating the Israeli War of Independence. and the regaining of Jerusalem. The UN mediator, Swedish diplomat Count Folke Bernadotte, was killed by the Zionist terrorist group Lehi in Jerusalem for having worked out a peace plan. Here's a commemoration of the Lehi terrorist group in Petah Tikva in Israel. And here's a memorial for Folke Bernadotte in Kusa, Denmark. In 1949, Jerusalem is proclaimed capital of Israel, and the Knesset moves from Tel Aviv. Jordan prevents access to the Western Wall and Mount Scopus, and King Abdullah I of Jordan is assassinated by Arab extremists on the Temple Mount. 1967, we have 6-day war tanks in real life, and then we have 6-day tank throw pillows for proud Israelis. The old city is captured by IDF, and it annexes it and declares Palestinians in East Jerusalem to be residents but not citizens. The Moroccan quarter is bulldozed, and the historic mosque demolished for the Western Wall Plaza. Israel conquers the Jewish quarter, evicts 6,000 residents and 437 shops. And Australian Protestant Dennis Michael Rohan burns part of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And in 1980, the Knesset passes the Jerusalem law stating that the Jerusalem is the capital, but the UN passes Resolution 478 that it will not recognize this law. In 1993, the Oslo Accord occurs, but Israel refuses to include East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Dead Sea, and refuses to accept the Green Line borders. In 1995, Rabin was assassinated in Tel Aviv, which begins Israel's slide to the political right. In 2000, Pope John Paul II is the first Latin pope to visit Jerusalem. And in 2000, the Camp David Summit is an effort to end Israeli and Palestinian conflict, but it fails. And 2000, followed by the Second Intifada, provoked by Ariel Sharon's controversial visit to the Temple Mount. This is Ovadia Yosef, the leader of Shas. This is the Israeli ultra-Orthodox religious party, and in 2008, Shas refused to form a government unless there were no negotiations at all, leading to a partition of Jerusalem. In 2018, the United States declared Jerusalem capital of Israel. The embassy opens, but Trump, unnoticed, signs a 6-month waiver, as previous presidents have, so the embassy is not yet fully moved. The United States will fund the Israeli Defense Fund for $700 million in the new budget for missile defense systems, although Israel already has 200 nukes aimed at Iran. They are the largest recipient of the United States military and economic aid, around $10 million daily. Then Israel passes a law that only Jews have full citizenship rights in Israel. This is the squad. In 2018, the blue wave of elected Democrats included 4 women of color, all under 50. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. They all have opposed anti-BDS legislation in Congress and have questioned the occupation and Israel's treatment of Palestine. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar requested visas to travel to Israel and Palestine. Trump told Israel to refuse them visas because they are anti-BDS and anti-Semitic. Israel at first refused to give them visas, then reversed and said they would be allowed. But the restrictions placed on them were severe, and Rashida wanted to visit her 90-year-old grandma and would not accept travel with conditions that she could not talk about politics. She believed as a member of the U.S. Congress she was entitled to oversee a nation receiving vast sums of money from the U.S. But Israel was worried that they would try to visit the village of Khan al-Ahmar that Israel is planning to demolish to make way for the expansion of illegal Jewish settlements in Palestine. Many